Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our How to Work with People based on Swami Kriyananda's book, The Art of Supportive Leadership. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Friend and Guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel your living presence, to move through this world with you as our constant companion. Guide us and bless us, that everything we do draw us closer to thee. Om. Peace. Amen. Yesterday I was talking about a certain psychological reality of, let me just see exactly why I was talking about it. Oh ma, è difficile. Yes, but it's difficult. About the confusion that sometimes that I lived through for many years, where I thought that the person that I was a facade, and that there was another, what I called the mythical me, that was actually really perfect. And if I kept bullying the one that was apparently there, then eventually it would give way and the other would come forward. And I won't go into all of that. But the mythical me that I was always thinking about was somebody who was much more perfect than I was. But afterwards, in discussion with some of my friends, someone pointed out that you can also have a mythical self that is a terrible person, that you may have been inculcated from childhood or from past life shames or failures, whatever it might be. One might become deeply convinced that the true self is really a noxious person, and that every time you do something good, then that's not really who you are, that the real self is the negative one. And that can be just as mythical. Negativity is just as mythical as exaggerated. Exaggerated negativity is just as mythical as exaggerated perfection. And all of it is an effort to not have to deal with what is. This is why Master's tremendous emphasis on the importance of humility paired with his brilliant definition of humility. Humility is simply self-honesty. And self-honesty is not admitting how really terrible you are, because the chances are you're not. I mean, the chances are that you're not, you're just ordinary terrible. I mean, we want to be anything except the mediocre middle. We'd rather, if we have to just admit that we're just ordinary, we'd rather be terrible. Or we'd rather imagine that we're perfect, but just to be perfectly adequate. As I was saying yesterday, just who I am is just perfectly adequate, and I'm just an ordinary person. It's so funny. It's less so now, but when all the past life things were beginning to come into the mainstream, you know, everybody's previous incarnations was always somebody important. You know, you just weren't the man who ran the grocery store and, you know, had 2 grandkids and had a small house and puttered around in his garden. It's like nobody would tell you that that's who you were. You always had to have some big dramatic story. There's a wonderful writer who wrote, or Taylor Caldwell was her name, and she wrote lots of stories from other times and places, and she asserted, and I hope I'm representing her accurately, that most of what she wrote was past life memories of her own. Interestingly, she was always some really outstandingly interesting character. It made very good novels, but you know, you sort of wondered, did you never just incarnate, take a break, and just be an ordinary farmer somewhere? Were you always on the cutting edge of thus and so? I mean, maybe yes, who's to say? But it plays into that lack of humility in the true sense, which is not self-abasement. It's just, this is who I am. And the way we keep that out of becoming exaggerated egotism, I mean, just imagine, let's say that you're a very gifted musician, and you rise to the position where the whole world thinks of you as the best violinist ever. And you get to travel the world and you play your violin, and everybody falls at your feet with enormous praise about your violin playing. 100 years from now, 150 years from now, very few people are even going to remember you. Swami Kriyananda used to like, there was one of our members in our community ran a very large used bookstore in this area. Gradually, books have started giving way to other forms of media, but it was for many years, it was a huge enterprise. And Swami used to love to go there because he liked to read. He would read for relaxation. He would enjoy perusing the shelves and bringing home a pile of interesting books. He said he both really enjoyed going there, and also he found it very disconcerting because he was a writer. He was a published author. He had a lot of books, and there were a lot of copies of people's books that had just found their way down to this used bookstore, and they were just piled up on the shelves like, who wants them anymore? And the author, Helen McInnes, who is a very good novelist, and she writes very entertaining stories, and they're clean, bright entertainment. They're pleasant to read. She was enormously popular. And there's just, shelves like this in the used bookstore, huge piles. Most people don't know her name anymore. It's just gone. The woman who wrote the book, the Life Everlasting, Marie Corelli, the book was published 100 years ago. She was an enormously famous author. Who knows her name now? So you can think, well, I'm the best in the world, and a century from now, no one will even care. And even in the moment, I'm the best in the world being Earth. How many inhabited planets are there? How many astral and causal spheres are there? Yes, I'm a good violinist. There's a joke about a very famous violinist, and someone came afterwards and said to him, I'd give everything to be able to play like you. And the man says, I have. I became this good because I gave everything I had to it. I have no life but this. I mean, that's how you begin, that's how you reach that level. You don't reach that level just by sort of casually affirming it. But even still, one incarnation, how many millions have we had? So all of that is just, if you have a talent and an ability, you claim it. And if you don't, you don't. And it all just comes out in the wash in the end. As Swami says, for a wave to go high, there has to be a corresponding trough. And so it just moves like that. But the mythical one is the one that makes us crazy. Because when you're trying to relate to the material world and to reality as it is, but you have imposed upon that reality something that is mythical, then there will always be a disconnect. How could there not be? I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to ride my bicycle, but my bicycle doesn't really exist. It's just like, how am I going to get to the store? I'm going to stand on the sidewalk sort of pedaling my mythical bicycle, but it's not going to move me to the store. I mean, it's really that simple. We have to be in what is, and then from what is, we can create new realities. To accept what is not a permanent condition. To accept what is the foundation point from which real change can begin to take place. Okay? So it just seemed like an important concept. So we're talking now about intuition and common sense. And yesterday was all about difficile. Yes, but it's difficult. And Swami says, experience alone that isn't enlivened by creative imagination too often inserts a but in the hope of killing all further discussion. it's that phrase, creative imagination, that I think is a really important concept here, because experience often tells us how challenging this can be. Experience can also tell us that it might not work because we tried it and it didn't work. That's one of those classic phrases that once you start, your ear opens for them. I think I said this already. Every time you hear it, you have to smile. You can't believe that somebody's actually seriously saying to you, we tried it, but it didn't work. And that's experience without creative imagination. Let's just think about it for a minute. Experience is something that has already happened. There was a particular time, there was a particular place, there were all these sets of circumstances, and something took place. And it either was positive, negative, or perfectly adequate, just right in the middle. Whatever it was, it's over. And the nature of time and the material plane and everything about this universe is that once something has happened, it is a unique moment that will literally never occur again. Because even the experience itself has impacted everyone who was part of that experience. It is also sent a vibration out into this vastly interconnected universe, and that vibration has also expressed itself and shifted the universe in ways that we often don't really have any idea. So when we come back to elements that might look like what happened then, by definition, it can't possibly repeat itself. Now, common sense is going to tell us that there may be elements that will come back together, but creative imagination is the ability to take something that isn't there and see how it could be brought into being. So experience without sufficient creative imagination only says, this is what happened before, this is what will happen again. This is what happened before, this is what will happen again. Now, I've talked a lot about paying attention to experience. Common sense is the ability to pay attention to experience, but you don't want your common sense to limit your options. That's why Swami is saying, intuition alone, you can get carried away with your creative imagination. Common sense alone, you can bind yourself to the past and compel yourself to repeat the past. But it's even worse, because when you start repeating what you've already done before, at least the first time around it had some spark of newness to it. But if now we're just going to do it again and do it again and do it again, this is what absolutely kills institutions, is they make all these rules and everything is just exactly as it was before. And we make sure, as Swami said, we make sure that we don't make too many terrible mistakes, but in doing so, we also make certain that we never do anything that has even a spark of genius in it, because by definition it would be new. And if it would be new, we would be stepping outside the safe boundaries of the past. Steve Jobs is famous for when he was, whatever it was that he was working on at that time, and somebody suggested he ought to survey the market and find out what they wanted from him. He said, how would they know what they want? I haven't invented it yet. And of course, the genius that he expressed in just innovating basically our whole society with the handheld devices and the music and the telephone and the cameras and just countless everything. He completely transformed society. And he couldn't have asked people if they wanted that, because they didn't have the creative imagination to know it was even there. He did. They had experience to think, who wants it? And, the lots of famous stories, especially in the computer era, about that, about, people saying, personal computers, why would anyone ever want such a thing? Just not having the creative imagination, thinking that the past was the future. This is why common sense has been paired with intuition in this chapter. These two qualities must work together harmoniously. Alone, they endanger the success of any enterprise. Common sense, because it can reduce all creative action to a state of rigor mortis. And intuition, because if unchecked, it can lead to disaster. So in a good working team, the word Swami uses, common sense and intuition have to work harmoniously together. I mentioned yesterday, I believe, or the day before, about my friend who was very successful in business, but he was the creative imagination guy, and he also had the common sense guy. And he was honest enough in himself to recognize the shortcomings of his talent, and his business partner had enough imagination to realize that his conservative nature alone would not bring them success. This is the word harmonious. So what we have to look for if we're a leader is we have to build a team that has, where all the talents are represented, but then work with them in such a way that, that everybody is respected and everybody respects each other. Because what gets to be really a catastrophe is if the imaginative people just become scornful of those who want to ground their ideas in practical reality. And if the practical reality people feel they're always trying to defend the institution from disaster because of these creative types over here, then all you have is war. And nobody gets the benefit of each other's reality. I remember once when Swamiji was trying to make a very difficult decision. It was during our period of time of litigation when we were in this more than a decade-long conflict with another organization that follows the same teachings that we do. But religious people are generally persecuted by other religious people because they're the ones who understand what you're doing. It was his own people who led to the crucifixion of Jesus. It was the Romans who had to carry out the sentence, but it was his own people who wanted it because he threatened their reality. And they tried to paint him as a threat to the Romans' reality, but the real threat was to their reality. So this is the way it works. So we were in the middle of this, and Swamiji had refrained from exposing that organization, exposing its shortcomings and even its extremely negative qualities, because he just didn't want to do it. It seemed like such a unfortunate thing to do. So he held back. He held back for years and years. But things reached such a point where Swami began to feel that a strong, very frank, very clear, impersonal but clear explanation of why we were being persecuted that didn't have anything to do with us. And so he wrote this paper, which is very powerful, very strong paper. And he wanted to distribute it widely so all the members of that organization would get it. And we had ways of doing that. But before he did, he called a meeting, an invitational meeting at his house, had some of us drive or fly in from other parts, other Ananda communities, those of us who were leaders. And then he invited a number of people from the village where he was living to have this meeting. And he read this paper, and he said he was thinking of widely distributing it. It was an incredible escalation of the conflict, of our response. It was an escalation of our defense. And so most people, because Swami wanted to do it, were willing to go along with it. And finally, just slightly toward the end of the meeting, this one woman who was a very gentle spirit, and she was from Texas, so she had a slight southern sound to her voice too, she finally just raised her hand and said, "I just have to speak up. I don't like this. I don't like this at all." Just like that. And Swami said, "Thank you." He said, "I invited you because I knew you wouldn't like it." He said, "I wanted someone here who would speak up and say they didn't like it." Because he wasn't afraid of all the different points of view. He wanted to know what God wanted and what was really right. And of course, once she said that, it gave others permission, that they should have had the permission before, but it opened the doorway. They felt inwardly to be a little more frank. And we ended up having an extremely good conversation about what was positive and what was negative about the ideas that Swami had. We never could have had that without a respectful regard for other points of view. An organization thinks, oh, it's going to run smoothly if I just get the people who get what I'm doing and will come along with me. But we can make terrible mistakes if we surround ourselves only with people who agree with us. In that particular instance, with that particular document, eventually it was released. Swami decided that he would publish it, and then he decided that he wouldn't publish it, and then he decided that he would publish it, and then he decided that he wouldn't publish it. It went on for at least a number of weeks. That just, this way, that way, this way, that way. He finally decided, for reasons that I don't clearly remember, but that it was simply the right thing to do, and he went ahead and did it. I concur with him. I think it was the right thing to do, but it was unpleasant. It was exceedingly unpleasant, and there you have it. I don't like it. I really don't like it. You know, that's right. Swami said, Swami's response, actually, now that I think about it, when she said that to him in just that way, he said, I don't like it either. You know, it was like, I understand how you feel. I don't like it either. And then we were able to talk about it from all sides. So that is what, and from the point of view of leadership and harmonious working with people, Swami talked about a person in a position of spiritual leadership who had gradually surrounded themselves with people who saw the world exactly as the leader saw it. And Swami said it was just exceedingly unfortunate, because the point of view got narrower and narrower, and it wasn't even that the leader preferred those people, it was that it became the definition of betrayal to have a different point of view than the leader. Swamiji had said multiple times, but he said, I prefer an honest argument to a mindless yes, he said, in any circumstance. If it's a sincere and that's how you feel, speak your mind. He said, let's get to the bottom of it. But the leader who only wants his way, your organization gradually just tweaks over. It just falls over to one side. So here then, Swami says, is a workable definition. Common sense is the willingness to learn from experience. Why willingness, Swami says? Why not ability? Why not say common sense is the ability to learn from experience? Instead, he writes, common sense is the willingness to learn from experience. He's so subtle. You know, everybody would write the ability to learn. But Swami stops and he meditates on it and he feels it out for a bit and he says, it's not just the ability, it's the willingness. And then he says, because the ability to learn from experience suggests more than common sense. Ability is an attribute of wisdom. So if you have the ability to learn from experience, you're already past common sense. You're actually, he uses the word wisdom. You're actually, you have some intuitive capacity to see and to go in a new direction. He says, but to have common sense means merely to be reasonable. And for a person to be reasonable, it is quite enough, surely, that he is willing to learn from experience. In willingness to learn, he goes on to explain, there is openness. You see what the difficile issue is, that there's not openness. It's like, but it's difficult. I'm not open to it. I don't want to do it. I want it to go away. I don't want to have to accept this. I want to reject it. So if our experience has shown that this is going to be challenging, that there might be obstacles here, that we need to stop and think about it, that there may be consequences. If you've already learned from all of that, then your intuitive idea is going to already take it into account. But if we're open, yes, these are the things that we've had before. These are the facts that we dealt with before. So let me think, what could I figure out from this? Why was it that it didn't work before? What is it that we didn't know? What could we do? What new ideas could we have? And where the common sense becomes an obstacle to progress and to creative work is when there's not openness to say, given what we know, let's think of what we can do next. There's just a desire to impose the past on the present and on the future. In willingness to learn, there is openness. And see, openness is also the key to harmonious working together. Because openness is tell me, what is that about? I enjoy very much talking to people who have either experiences or different points of view that I don't have at all, because then I get to find out. Really, and I don't have any hesitation to say to someone who uses a word or has a cultural reference or expresses a feeling that I don't know what they're talking about. What does that word mean? What does that word mean to you? Tell me what that feels like. What do you mean by saying you feel like this? I don't understand that. You know, what does that image that you just referred to, what does that represent? It doesn't communicate to me. A friend of mine, many years ago, her son was late college, I think, and he'd come home for a holiday. She was in his room, and this was where the trouble started. She opened his diary. And she read in his diary that he had decided that he was gay. And that's the life he'd been living at college. And she read in his diary that he wanted to talk to his mother about it, and he was dreading it. This is the mother reading the diary. So now the mother is in a really difficult spot because she can't go tell her son she read his diary, but she also knows that this conversation is coming. And at that time, this was 30 years ago, she didn't have any idea what she was going to do. This was her only child, too. So, you know, her picture had always been that he would get married, that he would have children, that she would be a grandmother to his kids. I mean, just whole lifetime of expectations, and all of a sudden, it looks like it might be different. So she came to me because the whole situation was way too much for her. She didn't know what to do about it. I said, well, the problem that you're facing is that you have no idea, you have no understanding whatsoever of what this means to him, of what that lifestyle is, of what kind of experience he's been having, what he's been thinking about this. This is just like, you're a complete zero. I said, if you were sitting next to someone on a plane and they started talking to you about this subject, you wouldn't hesitate to say, I have no understanding of this. Why don't you talk to me about it? I said, in your role as mother, you think somehow you have to know what you don't know. I said, when he brings all of this to you, what you need to say is you need to pretend you're sitting on the plane next to a stranger. And you have to say, honey, wow, that's so interesting. Why don't you tell me about this? Have you been thinking about this for a long time? You know, has this been in your mind? Like, when did this come into your mind? Like, tell me what this feels like. How does it make you feel? What do you expect? How do you picture your life? Just all these sorts of things. And he came to her. She did exactly that. She was extremely open and interested in a reality that wasn't hers. And afterwards, her son said, thank you, Mom. I never would have imagined that this conversation could have gone as well as it did. And she said, no, it wouldn't have if she hadn't been forewarned and been prepared for it. But you see, openness, that's the word for it. She was just open. She was open to the possibility that there was a reality she wasn't anticipating. She was open to learning something that she didn't already know. And that's what it is we're looking for. That's what willingness is. Willingness is being open to a reality we haven't considered. God bless you, my friends.